My name is Olivia, I'm 30 years old, and I work as a software engineer. For as long as I can remember, the family home in Burlington, Vermont wasn't just a place with four walls and a roof. It was the center of my life. It held memories of birthdays with balloons taped across the kitchen walls, late-night study sessions during college, and quiet mornings where the sound of the kettle on the stove was the backdrop to my dreams. I had poured my heart into that house, believing with every ounce of myself that it would forever remain my safe haven. Every door, every wall, every creaky stair carried my fingerprints, evidence of the love, sweat, and money I had invested over the years. But one night, that illusion shattered. We were at dinner, the four of us, seated at the oak table that had been in our dining room for decades. My mother, Linda, slammed her fork against her plate so hard that the sharp metallic sound seemed to slice through the air. It didn't sound like a casual slip. It sounded like a verdict being handed down. Her voice followed, loud and merciless. "You have 48 hours to get your stuff out," she declared. "That house is your sister's now." I blinked at her, stunned, but before I could form words, I saw my father, Richard, sitting quietly with his eyes locked on his plate. He didn't protest, didn't look at me, didn't say a single word in my defense. He simply nodded, like a man resigned to a decision already made. And then there was my sister, Vanessa. She had been living comfortably in California, too busy with her marketing job to care about this home for years. Yet now, without lifting a single finger, she was suddenly being handed everything I had built. Welcome to Revenge Amy channel. Help our channel reach our first 1,000 subscribers by liking and subscribing. Your support is what keeps us going and allows us to continue telling inspiring stories of justice, healing, and self-worth. Now let's get back to the story. The room seemed to spin. I looked around at the familiar space, the soft beige walls I had painted with my own hands, the curtains I had chosen after saving carefully, the sofa I'd bought with my overtime pay. Every sacrifice, every dollar, every ounce of energy I'd poured into this house was being erased with a single cruel sentence. The one who had given nothing was rewarded with everything, while I, the one who had carried the weight of this home for years, was discarded as though I had never belonged. My chest tightened, my heartbeat thundered. I couldn't breathe. The air became thick and suffocating, pressing down on me like an invisible weight. Their words cut like knives, and I knew in that moment that arguing would be pointless. If my own parents had already chosen to betray me like this, no amount of pleading or explaining would change their minds, so I rose quietly from the table, without another word. I walked to my room, shut the door behind me, and sat on the edge of my bed gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Rage and grief warred inside me, but beneath them both something stronger began to grow, resolve. They thought I would just walk away, pack my things, and disappear from the house I had saved with my own hands. They thought wrong that I end those 48 hours. Before Vanessa set foot inside this house she suddenly believed was hers, I promised myself that she would regret ever claiming it. The next morning, the weight of my mother's ultimatum still pressed on me like a stone. Sunlight filtered through the curtains of my bedroom in Burlington, but it felt dimmer than usual, as though the house itself knew it was being betrayed. I sat there, replaying every sacrifice I had made to keep this roof over our heads. 5 years earlier, when my parents had suffered a devastating financial crash, it had been me who stepped up. My job in software engineering paid well enough, but the mortgage payments were enormous. Still, I couldn't bear the thought of losing the home where I had grown up. So, without hesitation, I covered the mortgage, $80,000 over 3 long years. I drained my savings, worked overtime, and cut back on everything just to keep the bank from taking this house away. I still remember the day the bank called, threatening foreclosure. My father, Richard, had sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands, while my mother paced the room, her voice sharp with fear. "We're going to lose everything," she said. And I, desperate to preserve the only stability I'd ever known, opened my savings account and gave away nearly all of it. When the debt was cleared, their relief was palpable. My father looked at me with watery eyes, and my mother's shoulders finally loosened. At that moment, I thought it had been worth it. I thought we were a team. After that, I threw myself even deeper into taking care of the house. I painted the living room a warm beige, sanded and replaced the warped floorboards, fixed the stairs that creaked under every step. Every nail I hammered, every brushstroke of paint, every repair I completed felt like a promise that this house and by extension this family would stand strong. Meanwhile, my sister Vanessa was like a ghost. She lived far away in California, calling maybe twice a year, always too busy with her career to be involved. When I once mentioned the mortgage payments to her, she laughed dismissively and said, "That's your thing, Olivia." I sent her photos after I'd finished repainting the living room, proud of what I had accomplished, hoping maybe she'd acknowledge my efforts. She never replied. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was doing this for my parents, for our family, for the stability we all needed. At night, I would walk through the house, my hand brushing over the walls I had painted, feeling like they were a part of me. In truth, I was starting to believe the house was mine, not just legally but emotionally, spiritually. Yet beneath the surface, cracks were forming as the years went by. My parents leaned on me more and more. My mother often asked for just a little help with the bills, and I always covered them. My father, after losing his job, relied on me for car repairs and daily expenses. I didn't mind, at least not at first. I believe that's what families did. They supported each other. But even as I poured myself into their lives, I started to notice subtle differences in how they treated me versus how they spoke about Vanessa. My mother's tone during phone calls with her was softer, more affectionate than it ever was with me. My father would mention Vanessa's successes in California with a pride I never heard when he spoke of me, that I brushed it off each time, telling myself it was just normal parental favoritism, that it didn't mean anything. But last night's dinner proved me wrong. Their decision to hand the house, the very house I had saved, repaired, and kept alive, to Vanessa wasn't just unfair. It was a betrayal. It was a slap in the face so loud I could still feel it sting hours later. I stood in the living room, staring at the sofa I had purchased with months of careful saving. It wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was proof of my sacrifices, proof that I had built this home into what it was. The television on the wall, the washer in the basement, the curtains framing the beige-painted walls, all of it had come from my hard work. If they wanted me out, if they truly wanted to erase me from this place, then I would make sure they realized just what they were losing. My sister Vanessa hadn't lifted a finger, but she thought she could waltz in and enjoy the fruits of my labor. Not if I could help it, so I sat down with my laptop on my knees, my hands steadier than I expected. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to show them exactly what they were throwing away. And this was only the beginning. By early afternoon, I realized I couldn't just sit in silence. I needed answers, and I needed them quickly. That's when I dialed Rachel, my closest friend since our college days at the University of Vermont. She's a lawyer now, sharp, practical, and absolutely no nonsense. Over the years, she had been my sounding board for nearly every crisis, and if anyone could help me untangle the mess my parents had just thrown me into, it was her. Sitting cross-legged on my bed, surrounded by the walls of the Burlington family home I had practically rebuilt, I poured my heart out to her over the phone. My voice shook as I described the dinner scene. The fork my mother, Linda, had slammed against the plate, the way her voice cut through the air as she gave me 48 hours to vacate, the way my father, Richard, just sat there in silence, letting her words become law. Rachel didn't interrupt. She never does. That's one of her strengths. She listens with a level of focus that makes you feel anchored, even in the middle of a storm. When I finally stopped to breathe, her voice came through calm but firm. "Do you have any legal papers for the house? Anything from your parents, or even before them?" Her tone made me pause. "Not really," I said hesitantly. "My grandfather, George, owned the place before he passed 2 years ago. I always assumed it went straight to my parents after that." Rachel went quiet for a beat. Then, in that clipped, businesslike way of hers, she said, "Give me an hour. Don't do anything until I call back." I hung up, suddenly restless. My heart raced as I paced the narrow hallway, my mind replaying every memory of my grandfather. George had been the soul of this house. I could still see him sitting on the porch, his weathered hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug, his gravelly voice telling stories about how he had built this place brick by brick after returning from the service. He'd look at me with those crinkled eyes and say, "Olivia, this house will always be yours." At the time, I thought he was just trying to make me feel special. But now, I wasn't so sure. That I found myself digging through an old box in my closet, the one where I kept family photos. I pulled out picture after picture of him, standing tall beside the oak tree in the yard, his arm around me when I was barely taller than his knee. The memories stung sharp and raw, especially against the backdrop of my parents' betrayal. Almost exactly an hour later, my phone rang. Rachel's voice was tight with urgency. "Olivia, you're not going to believe this," she said. My stomach dropped. I reached out to a colleague in estate law and had them pull records at the Chittenden County Clerk's office. "Your grandfather left a will. Not only that, it names you and only you as the heir to this house. It's notarized, signed, and was filed 3 years before his death." The words hit me like a hammer. My knees buckled and I sank onto the edge of my bed, my hands trembling. How did I not know?" I whispered. "Because," Rachel replied, her voice suddenly ice cold, "your parents had access to the will. They knew, Olivia. They chose to keep it from you." I felt the air rush out of my lungs as though I'd been punched in the gut. My father and mother, the people I had trusted, supported, and sacrificed for, had deliberately hidden my grandfather's final wishes. They had watched me pour $80,000 into this house, watched me scrape and claw to save it, and still planned to hand it to Vanessa as if I were invisible. It was betrayal on a level I could hardly comprehend. All the pieces fell into place then. The long, affectionate phone calls my mother made to Vanessa. The pride in my father's voice when he mentioned her career in California. Their growing coldness toward me whenever money or the house came up. It wasn't favoritism, it was calculation. They had been grooming Vanessa as the chosen one, erasing me from the picture, all while I worked myself to the bone to keep this house alive. My chest tightened, a storm of anger and hurt swirling inside me. I stumbled into the kitchen, my eyes falling on my grandfather's old coffee mug sitting on the counter. The same chipped mug he'd held on the porch when he promised the house would always be mine. I picked it up and held it in both hands, my jaw clenched so hard it ached. This wasn't just unfair. It was a direct attempt to rewrite his legacy, to deny his wishes and the bond we shared. And for what? Because Vanessa had a shinier life in California? Because she had a husband, a bigger paycheck, or simply because she wasn't me? I wasn't sure of their reasoning, but in that moment it didn't matter. They had crossed a line. Rachel's voice broke through my thoughts again. "This will is ironclad, Olivia. You have legal rights to the house. We can challenge them. But you need to be prepared to fight." Her words steadied me, like a rope thrown to someone drowning. I didn't know what exact steps to take, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to walk away. Not this time. I pulled a notebook out of a drawer and flipped it open, my pen flying across the page as I started to list everything I could use. Bank statements, mortgage receipts, invoices for repairs, photos of the improvements I had made. Every nail, every dollar, every sacrifice I could document would become ammunition. Rachel promised to meet me the next morning to map out a concrete legal plan. She mentioned we'd likely need to file a claim to enforce the will, and that the sooner we moved, the stronger our position would be. Meanwhile, my parents thought they had blindsided me, that I'd pack up meekly and hand the house over to Vanessa. They had no idea what I was capable of. As the evening shadows stretched across the living room, I sat at the same table where my mother had slammed her fork just the night before. Only this time I wasn't the silent, stunned daughter. I was the rightful heir to this house, armed with the truth and ready to fight for what belonged to me. This wasn't just about a building anymore. It was about respect, justice, and reclaiming the promise my grandfather had made to me. And for the first time in years, I felt my hands stop trembling. That night, long after Rachel hung up, I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook still open. My pen had etched page after page of lists, mortgage receipts, utility bills, credit card statements for every repair I had made. The stack of papers in front of me looked less like household records and more like ammunition for war. When the first light of dawn crept through the windows, I felt the shift inside me. Yesterday, I had been devastated, blindsided by my parents' betrayal. Today I was focused, determined. If they thought I would simply walk away from the house my grandfather George had entrusted to me, they were about to be sorely disappointed. Rachel called again early that morning, her tone brisk. "The will is clear, Olivia. We'll need to file a claim to enforce it, but documentation of your financial contributions will strengthen the case. Start gathering everything. I'll meet you this afternoon." Her words steadied me. For the first time in days, I felt like I wasn't drifting. I had a direction. I moved from room to room, taking inventory of the life I had built here. The flat-screen TV mounted on the living room wall, the gray sofa I had bought with my first big paycheck, the stainless steel washer humming faithfully in the basement, the curtains I had picked out to match the beige paint I had rolled on myself. All of it was mine. Not ours. Mine. Paid for with my money, my sweat, my sacrifices. If my parents wanted me gone, fine. But I wasn't leaving these things behind for Vanessa to waltz in and enjoy, so I added another list to my notebook. Everything I had purchased myself. Each item was a piece of my identity, proof that I had been the one holding this home together. After hours of scribbling, I knew what I had to do. I pulled out my phone and searched for local moving companies in Burlington. One name caught my eye: Green Mountain Movers. Their reviews mentioned speed, discretion, and reliability. Perfect. I dialed, and a man with a gruff but polite voice picked up. Green Mountain Movers, this is Ethan. Hi, Ethan, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I need a rush job. Today if possible. A list of personal items: TV, sofa, washer, a few smaller things like a microwave and my dresser. They're mine, not shared. Can you send a truck by noon? There was a pause on the line, then a cautious, that's short notice, but I can make it happen. Address. I rattled it off and he gave me a quote. By the time I hung up, my pulse had steadied. This was the right move. While waiting, I walked through the house with sticky notes, tagging everything that was mine. The dining table had been a hand-me-down from my grandfather, so I left it. But the set of 4 new chairs? I had bought those last year after my mother, Linda, complained about the old ones. They were mine. The process was strangely calming, like reclaiming fragments of myself that my parents had tried to erase. With every note I placed, I reminded myself, this is your work, your money, your home. Around 10, the doorbell rang. I opened it to see Mrs. Thompson, our neighbor from across the street. Her kind eyes scanned my face before drifting past me into the house. She had probably seen me pacing through the windows all morning. You okay, Olivia? She asked gently. I forced a smile. It's complicated. I'm moving some things out. She stepped forward, squeezed my arm. You've always been good to this house. Whatever's happening, you don't deserve it. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I blinked back, tears, nodding. Thank you. Not long after she left, Mr. Harris stopped by. His work boots were still dusty from a morning shift. He had known my grandfather well, often swapping stories with him about fishing trips and local fairs. This place meant a lot to George, he said, his eyes roaming the living room. And to you too, I can see that. I swallowed hard, nodding. Their support, quiet but genuine, gave me strength. My own family had turned their backs, but the community around me saw the truth. By noon sharp, a white van pulled up. Ethan and 2 movers climbed out, efficient and no nonsense. I walked them through the house, pointing out the tagged items. They wrapped the washer in thick blankets to prevent scratches, hefted the sofa through the front door, and loaded the TV with careful precision. Watching them carry out the things I had worked so hard to buy was bittersweet. On one hand, it felt like dismantling pieces of my life. On the other, it was empowering, like I was taking back control, ensuring Vanessa wouldn't reap the rewards of my sacrifices. Rachel called again while the movers worked, confirming our meeting time. Keep receipts for the moving costs, she reminded me. It will strengthen your case. I agreed, my resolve hardening. By late morning, the house already looked emptier, but strangely, I felt stronger. My parents and Vanessa thought they could erase me, replace me, and pretend I had never been part of this home. They were wrong. By mid-afternoon, most of my belongings were packed and hauled away. I stood in the living room, staring at the bare walls where the TV had once hung, at the dent in the carpet where the sofa had sat. The space echoed now, hollow, but my heart beat steady, and then 3 sharp knocks at the door. I opened it to find Vanessa, my sister, standing there with a suitcase at her feet. Her heels clicked as she crossed the threshold without waiting for an invitation, her eyes scanning the empty living room like she already owned it. Where's everything? She demanded, her voice sharp, dripping with entitlement. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorway. I took what's mine. Her head snapped toward me, her face flushing with anger. Yours? Mom and Dad said this house is mine now. You don't get to strip it bare. I paid for that sofa, the TV, the washer, everything I took. You didn't contribute a single dime, I said, my voice steady but cold. Her eyes widened for a moment, then narrowed again. You think you're entitled because you threw some money around? This is my home now, Olivia. You're out. My fists clenched at my sides, but I refused to shout. You haven't been here in years. I kept this place standing while you were off in California, too busy to call twice a year. Vanessa laughed. A harsh, brittle sound. Oh please. You stayed here out of pity, playing the good daughter. Mom and Dad chose me for a reason. Her words sliced deep, but I didn't flinch. They chose wrong, I replied firmly. You don't know half of what I've done for this family. She stormed through the house, yanking open doors, stomping down to the basement, scanning the kitchen. Her voice rose with every empty corner she found. The chairs? The curtains? You took everything. Only what I paid for, I said evenly. You want a house? Furnish it yourself. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone. You're unbelievable. I'm calling Mom and Dad. They'll deal with you. Go ahead, I shrugged. They're not here. She froze, thrown off balance. What do you mean? I didn't elaborate, just leaned against the wall and watched her fumble with her phone. She paced the kitchen, her voice climbing as she spoke into the receiver. She gutted the place, Mom. It's empty. I stayed silent, letting her rant. When she finally hung up, she glared at me with venom. They're coming back from Montpelier tonight, she hissed. You're done, Olivia. I didn't move, didn't waver. You know where the exit is. She snatched up her suitcase, muttering under her breath, and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled that I stood there in the silence she left behind, my heart pounding but my resolve stronger than ever. Vanessa thought she could waltz in and claim everything. She had no idea what was coming. That evening, after Vanessa's dramatic exit and the echo of the slammed door still rattling in my chest, I finally allowed myself to sit on the now bare living room floor. The room felt hollow without the furniture, stripped of the warmth I had carefully built over the years. But to me that emptiness was victory. It meant my sister couldn't simply walk into the comfort of a life I had created. I stayed there for a while, staring at the space where my sofa used to be, when my phone buzzed. It was Rachel. You ready to meet tomorrow morning? She asked, her voice crisp. Yes, I said, steady this time. Everything I paid for is out. I have receipts, bank statements, even the moving costs from today. It's all in a folder. Good, Rachel replied. We'll file the claim first thing. We'll enforce George's will and make sure your rights are recognized. Just hold steady tonight. I hung up, relief washing through me. But the peace didn't last long. Around 8 that night, I heard a car pull into the driveway. The rumble was unmistakable. My parents were back from Montpelier. My stomach tightened through the blinds. I saw the familiar outline of my mother, Linda, stepping out of the car, her shoulders tight, her jaw clenched. My father, Richard, followed more slowly, but the stiffness in his posture told me he was bracing for conflict. The knock at the door came fast and sharp. I opened it only halfway. Olivia, what on earth did you do? Linda demanded. Her eyes darted past me into the stripped-down house. Vanessa said you gutted the place. I took what belonged to me, I said coolly. This is not yours to decide. Linda's voice rose. The house is Vanessa's now. You had no right. I cut her off, my voice steady. Grandpa George thought otherwise. Her face blanched for just a second before hardening again. Don't start this nonsense. But I saw it, the flicker of recognition, the slip of guilt. Richard stepped forward, his voice lower but no less sharp. We made a family decision, Olivia. You need to respect it. Stop making this harder than it needs to be. A family decision? I shot back. Was I part of that decision? Or did you too conveniently forget that George left this house to me? Richard's mouth tightened. Linda glanced away. Their silence said more than words ever could that I didn't give them time to recover. Rachel already pulled the will from the county records. It's ironclad. You knew. You both knew, and you hid it from me. Linda's face flushed crimson. We were protecting the family. You don't understand. Vanessa has a husband, a stable life, children on the way. She needs this house more than you do. I laughed bitterly. Protecting the family? You mean protecting Vanessa? I poured $80,000 into this house, paid every bill, fixed every broken board, and you decided she deserved it more? Because she called you twice a year and had a shinier life. Richard finally raised his voice, something he rarely did. Enough. You're tearing this family apart with your selfishness. Selfishness. I felt my anger surge. You let me sacrifice everything while Vanessa did nothing. And then you planned to throw me out like trash. Tell me again who's selfish. For a moment the house fell silent, the kind of silence that makes the air heavy. Linda's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her lips pressed together in defiance. Richard looked down, unable to meet my gaze, then Linda hissed. If you go through with this, if you challenge us legally, you'll regret it. You'll be cut off from this family for good. I straightened my shoulders. Maybe that's the best thing that could happen to me. I closed the door on them before either could respond, the sound of the lock clicking into place echoing louder than any words. Later that night I couldn't sleep. My phone lit up over and over with missed calls from both of them, then from Vanessa. Each voicemail grew more frantic, more desperate, more manipulative. Olivia, you don't know what you're doing, Linda pleaded in one. You're making a mistake. Call us back, Richard said in another. Vanessa's message was full of venom. You think you've won? You haven't seen what's coming. I turned the phone off and tossed it aside. I wasn't going to be guilt-tripped or bullied anymore. Instead, I packed a bag with essentials and drove to Rachel's apartment in downtown Burlington. She welcomed me in without hesitation, her sharp eyes scanning me. They're already rattled, aren't they? She asked. I nodded. They came back tonight. I confronted them about hiding the will. They didn't deny it. Rachel smirked, a fierce edge in her expression. Good. That means we have leverage. Tomorrow we'll move fast. By the time they realize what's happening, it'll be too late. Sitting at her kitchen counter, sipping the coffee she handed me, I felt the tension in my body start to ease. For the first time in days, I wasn't alone. The next morning, the plan moved forward quickly. Rachel drove us to her office, a modest but professional space filled with neatly stacked case files and framed certificates. She laid out the documents she had already obtained, the will, notarized and signed by my grandfather George 3 years before his death. My name stood out boldly as the sole heir. Here's what we'll do, Rachel explained. We'll file a petition to enforce this will. It's straightforward, but we'll also attach affidavits showing your financial contributions to the property. Mortgage payments, renovations, purchases, everything you listed. That way, even if they try to contest, the evidence of your investment strengthens your case. I nodded, sliding the thick folder of receipts and statements across her desk. It's all here. Every dollar I spent. Rachel leafed through them, impressed. This is more than enough. Olivia, you've done the work, legally and literally. Her confidence bolstered me. For so long, I had allowed my parents' voices to dictate how I saw myself, but in this office with Rachel guiding me, I began to believe I could stand on my own. When we left her office, the September air was crisp and cool. I inhaled deeply, as if filling my lungs with courage. I wasn't the scared daughter sitting silently at the dinner table anymore. I was the rightful heir to my grandfather's house. I was ready to fight. And I knew one thing for certain. My family had underestimated me for the last time. That evening, I stayed at Rachel's apartment in downtown Burlington. My belongings were safely stored in a rented unit nearby, but my phone buzzed relentlessly on the kitchen counter. My mother's name, Linda, flashed across the screen again and again. I let it go to voicemail. I knew exactly what those calls would sound like. Accusations wrapped in guilt. Finally, curiosity got the better of me, and I pressed play on one of the messages. Olivia, what have you done? Linda's voice screeched through the speaker, sharp and frantic. There's a stranger in our house. Some man claims he owns it now. Explain yourself. Then my father's voice cut in, heavier, colder. This isn't funny. Fix it. Now. I sat frozen, my pulse racing. A stranger? For a second I didn't understand until Rachel, sitting across from me with her laptop open, glanced up with a satisfied smile. I moved quickly, she explained calmly. We filed to enforce George's will, and in doing so, we exposed the transfer your parents tried to orchestrate. The county processed it, and when the record went public, a local investor jumped at the chance to buy the property. It's legal, Olivia. The deed has already changed hands. My throat went dry. So, the house isn't theirs anymore? Rachel nodded. That's right. And it isn't Vanessa's either. It belongs to the new owner. Your parents forced your hand. You used your legal right to bring the truth forward, and in the end it meant letting go of the house. But make no mistake, they're the ones who lost here, not you. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Richard. Against my better judgment, I answered. Dad, I said, my voice even. His tone was laced with disbelief. Olivia, tell me this isn't true. You sold the house out from under us. I swallowed hard but kept my voice firm. You hid Grandpa George's will. You tried to give the house to Vanessa, knowing it wasn't yours to give. Don't blame me for exposing the truth. We were protecting the family, Richard stammered. You can't just, I cut him off. Protecting the family? No. You were protecting Vanessa. You betrayed me. And now you've lost the very thing you tried to steal. Before he could respond, I ended the call, my hands trembling but my resolve iron strong. Not long after, another voicemail came from my mother. This time her voice was shrill, nearly unrecognizable. Olivia, you're tearing us apart. Come fix this before it's too late. I closed my eyes, exhaled slowly, and deleted the message. Rachel leaned back in her chair, her gaze sharp. They're panicking. They thought you were powerless, but the law was on your side. The deed is final. They can't undo it. Her words landed like a lifeline. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one scrambling to patch things together. It was my parents and Vanessa facing the fallout of their own choices. Still, a pang of loss twisted in my chest. This house had been my sanctuary, my proof that I could hold everything together. Now it belonged to someone else. I hadn't wanted to sell it, but my parents' lies had left me no choice. As I sipped from Rachel's chipped coffee mug, I realized something important. The walls of that house had never defined me. It wasn't the building that proved my worth, it was my strength to fight back, to choose myself even when my own family tried to erase me. The following days were a blur of unanswered calls and voicemails that grew more desperate with each attempt. Olivia, we're your family, Linda pleaded in one message. You can't do this to us. This isn't over, Vanessa hissed in another. You'll regret crossing me. But I didn't call back. I didn't explain. I didn't justify. For once, I allowed the silence to be my shield. Rachel kept me grounded. She finalized the paperwork, filed affidavits documenting my financial contributions, and met with the investor who had purchased the property to ensure every legal box was checked. They can contest all they want, she told me, but the paper trail is clear. George wanted you to have the house. Your parents ignored that. Now they've lost it for good. The irony wasn't lost on me. Linda and Richard had tried to steal my inheritance to give it to Vanessa, and in the end, none of them got what they wanted. Their greed had cost them everything. Meanwhile, I walked through Burlington streets feeling lighter, even if a small part of me still ached for the home I once believed would always be mine. Weeks passed, and I settled into a temporary apartment. My sofa, my TV, the washer, and the other belongings I had rescued from the house filled the space, turning it slowly into something that felt like home. Each item was a reminder that while I had lost the building, I had kept the pieces of myself that truly mattered. But my family wasn't doing so well. Through whispers in the community, I learned that Linda and Richard had moved into a small rental on the edge of town. Their once proud reputation had crumbled. Neighbors like Mrs. Thompson and Mr. Harris, who had supported me quietly through the ordeal, now looked at my parents with open disappointment. Word had spread. They had hidden George's will, deceived their own daughter, and lost everything in the process. As for Vanessa, I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she had scrambled to buy a house back in California. She had expected to inherit our family home for free, but when it was sold, she had no choice but to dip into her savings. The news didn't exactly bring me joy, but it felt like justice. For once, she was learning that entitlement came with a price. At night, I would sit with Rachel over cups of coffee, going over final legal filings. One evening, she smiled at me, her sharp lawyer's edge softened. You know, Olivia, she said, you're stronger than they ever gave you credit for. They thought they could control you, and instead you turned the tables. That takes guts. I smiled back, a genuine warmth spreading through me. I spent years undervaluing myself, thinking my worth came from keeping that house together. But I was wrong. My worth comes from standing up for myself. From finally saying no. Rachel raised her mug in a mock toast. To new beginnings. I clinked my cup against hers, a strange but welcome sense of peace settling over me. For so long, I had believed that keeping the family home alive would keep my family together. But the truth was they had chosen their betrayal long before I chose my revenge. Now, As the night stretched on and Burlington's quiet streets glowed under lamplight, I realized that I had gained something far more important than property, that I had gained myself. Months later, I stood in my new apartment in Burlington, sunlight streaming through wide windows that looked out over the street below. The room was quiet, peaceful, untouched by arguments or accusations. My sofa sat in the corner, the same gray one I had bought with my first big paycheck, its fabric familiar and comforting. My flat-screen TV rested against the opposite wall, my washer and microwave tucked neatly into place. These weren't just objects, they were symbols of survival. They were proof that even stripped of the house I had poured myself into, I had managed to carry forward the parts that truly belonged to me. Life had taken on a different rhythm. I had landed a new position at a local marketing firm, one that challenged me in ways I hadn't expected. The work wasn't as high-paying as my old software engineering role, but it was fulfilling. My days were filled with brainstorming sessions, coffee runs to the cafe down the street, and afternoons where my ideas were actually valued instead of dismissed. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building a future on my own terms, not tied to the expectations of Linda or Richard, not tethered to the weight of a house that had been used against me. That I hadn't spoken to my parents or to Vanessa since that night at Rachel's. I had blocked their numbers, silenced their desperate pleas, and cut off their access to me entirely. At first, the silence was heavy, pressing down on me like a new kind of grief. But slowly it transformed into something else: space. Space to breathe, space to think, space to rediscover who I was without their constant manipulation. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard bits and pieces of what had become of them. Vanessa, faced with the harsh reality of adulthood, had scrambled to buy her own home in California. She had expected to inherit our family home effortlessly, to step into comfort without sacrifice. Instead, she had been forced to dip into her savings, sign mortgage papers, and shoulder the kind of responsibility she had always shrugged away. The news didn't make me smile, but it did feel just. Actions had consequences, and Vanessa was finally learning that lesson. As for Linda and Richard, they had moved into a small rental on the outskirts of Burlington. The house they had once claimed as theirs was gone, their reputation in the neighborhood crumbling as word spread of their deceit. Neighbors like Mrs. Thompson and Mr. Harris, who had always been kind to me, didn't hold back their disappointment. The story of how my parents had hidden George's will, how they had tried to erase their own daughter from his legacy, traveled quickly through our tight-knit community. What had once been respect for my parents' long-standing presence in Burlington turned into pity, even scorn. That I didn't gloat over their downfall. But I didn't shoulder their burdens either. For the first time in my life, I allowed them to live with the weight of their own choices. Rachel remained my anchor through it all. She checked in regularly, not just as a lawyer but as a friend. She had finalized every legal detail, ensuring the sale of the house was airtight and that my rights had been fully recognized. Over coffee one afternoon, she leaned across the table with a grin. "You know," she said, "you're stronger than they ever gave you credit for. They thought they could control you, but you turned everything upside down." I smiled, feeling the truth of her words. For years, I thought my value came from keeping that house alive, from patching the roof, paying the bills, fixing the stairs. But it turns out my worth was never in those walls. It was in my ability to stand up and finally draw a line. Rachel raised her mug in a toast to boundaries. I clinked my cup against hers, the warmth of her friendship grounding me. Setting boundaries was the hardest lesson I had ever learned. Cutting contact with Linda and Richard wasn't about anger, it was about peace. I had given too much, too long, trying to win their approval, trying to keep a family together that had already chosen to fracture. In the end, I realized I didn't need their validation to be whole. Sometimes family isn't the people who share your blood. Sometimes it's the people who respect your boundaries, who stand by you when you've been cast aside, who remind you that you deserve better. People like Rachel, people like Mrs. Thompson and Mr. Harris, who had offered quiet words of support when I needed them most. One crisp autumn morning, I walked along the Burlington waterfront, the lake shimmering under the rising sun. The air smelled of leaves and wood smoke, the world alive with color. For the first time in years, I felt light. The burden of carrying everyone else's expectations had lifted. I wasn't the daughter who sacrificed silently anymore. I was Olivia, the woman who fought back, who claimed her worth, who chose herself. Did I miss the old house? Sometimes. There were nights when I thought about the creaky stairs, the oak tree in the yard where George used to tell me stories, the chipped mug he left behind. But those memories were mine, not the house's. They lived in me, not in those walls. And nothing Linda, Richard, or Vanessa had done could ever take that away. As I stood by the water, I whispered softly to the wind, as though George might hear me. I kept your promise, Grandpa. The house may be gone, but I didn't let them erase me. I didn't let them win. The breeze rustled through the trees, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. In the end, my story wasn't about losing a home. It was about finding myself. About realizing that the people who try to diminish you, whether they're strangers or your own family, don't get to decide your worth. I had been tested, betrayed, and nearly erased. But I had come out stronger, freer, and more certain of who I was than ever before. And as I walked back to my apartment, my steps light and steady, I knew this was only the beginning of a life I was finally building for me. Thank you for following this story till the end. If you found this an emotional journey of betrayal, justice, and inner strength, please help Revenge Amy reach its first 1,000 subscribers. Just a like and subscribe. Your support will be a great motivation for us to continue bringing more inspiring stories. Click subscribe today and be a part of this journey. See you in the next stories.